I think that initially the media focused on an enormously limited number of themes. I mean, certainly there was a lot of emphasis, and probably very needed, on the question of rescue operations, the human interest stories. Those things were important. I mean, they had to give the tragedy, in a sense, a human face. But I think they immediately moved from that, or in conjunction with that, almost created a kind of moral panic by presupposing and accepting the assumption that the only response to this was in the form of a military retaliation. So they, in a sense, moved from a position of compassion to a kind of highly militarized position in which the question of compassion seemed to completely be eliminated from the response. There was no sense that there was some other position or other positions that one might take. There was some talk about the need for beefed up security, and I think in many respects this is completely legitimate. But at the same time, there was no self-consciousness about the kind of xenophobia that was already in the air in this country, that it seems to me their discourses were fanning. And I think in this sense, the media becomes very, very important, not only as a pedagogical tool, not only because it presents, in this instance, a very limited number of positions, a very limited range of positions, because the media is controlled by a very limited range of corporations. But in fact, it sets the conditions for people in part supporting policies, because they have no sense that there are policies outside of the dominant discourse. They end up supporting very limited policies. And I think that the media needs to really be taken to task for this. In a sense, that what the media did was undercut its very possibility for allowing the nation to engage in a conversation about what the conditions were under which, or the context might be, under which we could truly understand this event. It's not enough to frame the event around the binarism of democracy versus terrorism, because that binarism is false. Because in many ways, we have to understand how we've become complicitous with forms of terrorism that in part might explain why, in fact, so many people throughout the world really hate American symbols, really hate in some way what America is doing. And I think by shutting off that dialogue, it prevents the importance of a kind of national conversation that in many ways won't be simply turned over to experts, won't be simply turned over to the Department of Defense, won't be simply turned over to people like Bush and you know, his limited sort of right-wing contingent of policymakers. And so I think in that sense, the media doesn't become a public sphere. The media actually becomes simply an adjunct of established political power and corporate interest.